Good evening, everybody. It's my great pleasure to welcome you very warmly to Engineering the Future, Navigating a Nuclear Tomorrow. I'm Julien Epps, Dean of Engineering. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land that we're meeting on, the Macgill, paying my respects to elders past and present, and extending that respect to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who are present here today. Indigenous knowledges enabled people to live here on these lands sustainably for tens of thousands of years. By comparison, UNSW seems like a recent arrival. Just 75 years ago, it was an empty paddock and a vision in the minds of its founding committee. It's been an incredible 75 years though, going from an empty paddock to a global top 20 university. During that time, engineering professors Chris Fell and Tony Fain established world leadership in low-pressure membranes for water filtration, one of UNSW's earliest commercialization successes in the 1970s. They also created the UNESCO Centre for Membrane Technology, one of only 4 UNESCO science centres worldwide. During that time, engineering professor Maria Skillas-Kazakos pioneered the development of the vanadium redox battery, creating a new flow battery industry for long-duration energy storage. During that time, engineering professor Martin Green, known to many of us, and his research group, which is now so large it occupies an entire school, famously set world record after world record in photovoltaic solar cell efficiency, created the technologies that now account for more than 90% of all installed solar generation worldwide. Not only that, but as a school, they trained all of the leaders in that industry. So in its short history, UNSW Engineering has created entire industries that previously didn't exist. UNSW is ranked #1 in Australia for engineering and #1 for startups and spin-outs for 3 years running now. We educate more than 15% of Australia's engineers right here on this campus, including world-leading degrees like quantum engineering and geoenergy and geostorage engineering. Among our programs, we're also the only university in Australia with a complete nuclear engineering program, which began in 2014 with the support of the Tyree Foundation. Interestingly, this continued the legacy of our first 2 vice-chancellors, Sir Philip Baxter and Sir Rupert Myers, who were both directly involved in developing nuclear engineering in Australia from the mid-1950s onwards. Today, UNSW has some of the best nuclear scientists in the world and strong partnerships with industry, defence and research organisations. In 2023, we established the UNSW Nuclear Innovation Centre, again with generous support from the Tyree Foundation. It's an incredibly collaborative, independent centre that brings experts together from various disciplines to drive innovation and advance nuclear science and engineering in Australia. The role of nuclear technologies in our national and global futures needs immense research, capability building, governance and discussion. UNSW is pleased to be at the forefront of research, innovation and education focused on the potential of these nuclear technologies in areas like medicine, defence, security, energy, waste management and irradiated materials. We're at the forefront of the research to improve lives and to prepare us for all of Australia's possible nuclear futures. One of these, of course, is AUKUS, which requires Australia to graduate and upskill tens of thousands of people, both Pillar 1 for nuclear submarine capability and Pillar 2 for a whole range of advanced nuclear capabilities. Another is research. UNSW Engineering researchers are discovering new materials that can be used to lock up nuclear waste safely forever. We're advising the International Atomic Energy Agency on using blockchain to safeguard nuclear materials and prevent the proliferation of nuclear weapons. We're researching corrosion in nuclear power reactor fuel and changing fuel composition to make it more resistant to accidents. We're discovering new kinds of nuclear medicine and new pathways for radiopharmaceutical medicine to deliver life-saving treatments to thousands of people. We're designing new materials research techniques and using these to assess the performance of nuclear fuel ceramics with exceptionally high thermal conductivity and melting temperature, which NASA is planning to use for powering nuclear rockets and space power reactors for travel to Mars and for powering Moon and Mars missions, nothing less. And we're researching energy futures and designing foresight studies that fairly include all energy sources to find optimal clean energy solutions for Australia. On top of that, we're currently organising Australia's first ever nuclear innovation boot camp for July this year with a host of US universities. We're expecting the boot camp to attract even more talent into Australia. We're also regularly teaching students through UNSW Canberra and a bespoke graduate certificate course for the Department of Defence, which is designed to help Defence effectively deliver the AUKUS nuclear submarine program for Australia. We're creating nuclear learning communities through our external short courses. Some of you, I know, have attended these, which we've delivered with experts and with valued collaborators from Imperial College London, MIT School of Nuclear Science and Engineering, and the Stimson Centre in the US. Colleagues from Imperial College, Sir Robin Grimes, and the Stimson Centre, Dr. Cindy Vestergaard, are speakers in tonight's discussion. Thank you for that. As we contribute to the advancement of the nuclear science and engineering field in Australia, we need to keep focusing on UNSW's enduring vision, which is to improve lives around the world and to have a positive impact on our society. Hence the societal impact theme of UNSW's new 10-year strategy, which was launched right in this hall here just a week ago. Once again, I welcome you all to UNSW Engineering. I look forward to this evening's event, continuing the important dialogue about the future of nuclear technology for Australia. It's now my pleasure to introduce Associate Professor Edward Obbard, who will chair tonight's panel.
So hi everyone. Yes, I'm Edward Obbard, and I'm the director of the UNSW Nuclear Innovation Centre. So whether we are talking about the AUKUS optimal pathway or the future of civilian reactor technology, achieving Australian sovereign nuclear capacity will be so much more than just a result of technology transfer. Advancing Australian nuclear innovation goes hand in hand with developing the expert nuclear workforce that Australia needs for national security, supporting AUKUS Pillar 1, a workforce that we are building through our work at the Nuclear Innovation Centre. This year, we commence a 10-year programme of work funded by a $7.5 million donation from the Sir William Tyree Foundation. Thank you, Robbie and Peter, for your long-term support and guidance that has made the Nuclear Innovation Centre possible. Thinking about nuclear innovation, I wanted to convene this panel this evening to help us place Australia's unique opportunities, strengths, and characteristics as a relative nuclear newcomer country in the wider world of nuclear development. And the opposition coalition's energy policy has certainly given us a lot to discuss. I guess as a director of a nuclear innovation centre, I'm cautiously supportive of this policy because it recognises a role in Australia's future for nuclear innovation. From the recent Frontier Economics report, that policy appears to be to commission 13 gigawatts of installed nuclear generating capacity between 2035 and 2050. And the inclusion of nuclear power in the national electricity market appears to cost 25% less than AEMO's purely renewables and storage approach. This is all very good, but as nuclear advocates love to tell everyone else, it's not all about the money. I'm wondering, how are we going to develop a robust nuclear fuel supply chain to support our nuclear electricity generation? Is the impact of new technology going to change the way nuclear energy is produced in the coming decades? And how will these nuclear generators impact our electricity grid? It's not really clear. Many things are not clear exactly how it's going to work. But to help us discuss these questions and more, I'd now like to welcome our panel members to the stage. So firstly, Professor Iain Macgill works on technical, commercial, and policy challenges of integrating new nuclear technology into the electricity industry. Hello, Iain. Iain is a professor in the UNSW School of Electrical Engineering and Telecommunications. And thank you, Iain, for being one of the strong connections from the UNSW Nuclear Research Group to the large community at UNSW working on renewable energy. It is connections like this that I think are special in our research community. Dr. Cindy Vestergaard is a senior fellow and director of the Converging Technologies and Global Security Program at the Stimson Center in Washington, D.C. Dr. Vestergaard is internationally the foremost person able to describe the transformations taking place in the global nuclear industry driven by decarbonization, conflict, and geopolitics. Cindy, you have been every bit a mentor to me in relating my engineering research to policy questions and wider social impact, exemplified by our work using blockchain technology for nuclear safeguards, an idea introduced by you in 2018. I'm excited to have you visit us at UNSW. And finally, Professor Robin Grimes, Professor of Materials Physics at Imperial College London. Professor Grimes' research covers computational modeling of nuclear materials and behavior of nuclear fuel and other materials inside nuclear reactor cores. Thanks, Robin. Robin served as UK Chief Scientific Advisor to the Foreign and Commonwealth Office and Chief Nuclear Scientist to the UK Ministry of Defence. At UNSW, we like to think that one of Robin's greatest achievements was helping to restart our nuclear engineering programme with Sir William Tyree and ANSTO back in 2014. So that's all for introductions. I'm now going to come over here. So we were going to start, so I've done a very brief and informal kind of introduction to the panel members, but maybe they'd all like to have a couple of minutes just to introduce themselves to you.
Ladies first?
Ladies first, go on, Cindy.
So you already know my name. I'm a Danish Canadian, I should first say, living in the United States for almost 9 years. Before that, and working at the Stimson Center, running the Converging Tech program. Before that, also running the Nuclear Safeguards program and the Blockchain in Practice program. Before that, I was in Denmark as a senior researcher at the Danish Institute for International Studies, and before that, actually working for the Canadian government. At that time, the Department of Foreign Affairs and International Trade, essentially it's a foreign ministry. I have dealt with the whole weapons of mass destruction, non-proliferation, arms control disarmament field for more than 20 years now. I haven't aged a day, of course. And so I'm really excited to be here. There's obviously a lot that's going on in the nuclear world, and it's kind of hard to keep pace, so I'm really excited to be here on this panel to talk about it all. Thank you.
Thanks, Cindy. Lots of clapping. Go on, Robin's next.
So, yes, I'm an academic, I think, at heart. I'm a researcher. I'm still writing papers, which I must admit I enjoy tremendously. But I spent, in the end, my 3-year contract to be part of the UK government went on for 9.5 years. For those of you who have ever been in those positions, you'll understand that very well indeed. So here I have, for almost 10 years, I guess, come here and taught the senior level course, the first part of it. It's 3 hours every night, 5 sessions in a row. So the students have to put up with me for 3-hour blocks, which I think is really quite cruel, I must say. But nevertheless, they seem to manage it. And I was reflecting actually last night when I did the first of this times 3 hours. We looked at the new entrants for nuclear in 2010. and then compared them with the new entrants for 2022. I have that data. And 2010, it included the UAE, it included Vietnam, it included Poland, and many others. 2022, the UAE had delivered pretty much on time and pretty much on budget. They'd been successful, they'd managed it. Vietnam had stepped away. Countries like Germany had, who were very well established, very well run reactors, had stepped away from it, although in the last few weeks they had declared that they will think about restarting some of those reactors. But the point is that this is really complicated sorts of discussions. Lots of things happen. Sometimes they're successful, sometimes they're not. And what we try to do here at UNSW is prepare students who understand the physics, yes, and they understand the engineering, yes, but they also understand that context so that they can help understand the complexity and that systems engineering issues, which of course you know about very well indeed, but also the policy issues and the understanding of how nuclear sits in the greater context, which is what Cindy of course knows as well. So I think you've got, you know, a really innovative approach to nuclear engineering here. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Robin.
Yeah, okay, hi everyone. Professor in energy systems, but most of the work I do research-wise here at the university is in an interdisciplinary university collaboration, the collaboration on energy and environmental markets. It's explicitly interdisciplinary, so there's lots of engineers, but we're also working with academics from business and social sciences as well, particularly around questions of social license and consensus with the introduction of new technologies. So across SEAM, we're doing a wide range of work. Our focus area is clean energy transition. And we've now been going for about 20 years, and that story has changed so markedly over that time, hasn't it? So when we were establishing what was then the centre in energy environmental markets, we had virtually no grid-connected renewables on the east coast of Australia at all. Now, wind and solar alone are pushing up around the 40% of our generation mix. That's as energy. Peak penetrations of wind and solar around the 70%. So it's been an extraordinary transformation over that time. But I would add that we have also looked at nuclear. The first paper I wrote on that was back in around 2005-6, Sustainable Pathways. We've also looked at carbon capture and storage. But as Ed highlighted, a big part of the transition here in Australia has been the deployment of renewables. That's the clean energy technology which has transformed so far. But of course, we've got to look into the future. We have a 2050 net zero deadline. Australia, like many countries, has deadlines around 2030, 2035, targets being established. So a lot of our work is methods of looking forward around our clean energy pathways. What's feasible, what's not, that's a useful first test. But then the economics is a big part of it. Sitting above that, of course, are these wider questions of energy transformation. Equity and justice is now such a big piece of our thinking around what it's going to take to deliver clean energy transition.
Thanks, Iain. So to get into the questions, Cindy, I want to start with you. I mean, I think something that's been hitting the news repeatedly actually in the US is the use of data technology companies adopting nuclear for data centers and so on. Can you tell us a bit about what's happening in the USA with energy usage by data centers and how the nuclear industry might be responding?
Sure. So for the past 20 years, the energy demand and the base load have been pretty equal. And it's starting to certainly increase. And I actually live in a county in Virginia that is adjacent to what's a county that is known as Data Center Alley in the United States. And I'm going to give you some stats and facts. This is why I have my little tablet here, just to make sure I get it all right. between 2018 and 2023, the energy usage in Loudoun County, Data Center Alley, increased 240%. This is before the dawn of ChatGPT. And to kind of give you a little bit more of a context into what that means. Loudoun County has 200 data centers and 117 that are in development. And this is, again, just in one little county. And this is more data centers than in the next in the next 6 US markets with data centers. And also, just for, you and I were talking about this earlier, Iain, in all of Australia, there are 248 data centers. The forecasts, so right now, so between 2018 and 2023, so that was, it went up from 1 gigawatt to 3.4 gigawatts. The forecast by 2028 is 11.56 gigawatts. There is no way that Virginia grid can handle that increase. So Loudoun County is looking at a lot of different ways, like a lot of other different parts of the United States, in terms of how to do microgrids. Can we do microgrids? There is no governance, there's no structure and infrastructure for microgrids in the United States. So it's really starting from scratch and looking at how to meet this demand going forward. The discussion, though, is also, as you said, I mean, big tech was in the news all last year and the year before, MOUs between different advanced reactor companies, Meta, Google, and my gosh, the big 4 or 5 even. And now, granted, and Robin's going to talk a little bit about that later to kind of give him a little bit of a tee up. Advanced reactors and small modular reactors, they've been signing all these agreements with them, but there are more than over 80 different reactor designs out there. So that doesn't mean that all these different MOUs and agreements that are signed means that actually these advanced reactors or SMRs are the ones that actually will go forward and will be licensed. So I think that's an important part to keep in mind. But the discussion is really about how do we, and how does Loudoun County, but also how does the United States and how do others in the world be able to meet this demand on our phones and our desperate need for AI, but not only that, just also for data centers. And just one little fun fact before putting it forward, is that Loudoun County also, for those of you who've ever traveled to Washington, D.C. and landed in Dulles International Airport, that area is where extensive fiber optic cables were put there in the 90s. And 70% of email traffic goes through, the world goes through Loudoun County, right by that airport. So this is why there is such a surge in terms of where we're looking in terms of forecasts going forward.
That's interesting, Cindy, because that is like distinct corporate private ownership of generation, isn't it? Are these companies considering then owning and operating these advanced reactors for their data centers? That
would change a paradigm.
Yeah.
So, for 136 years, within the paradigm is powering, large power plants. And same thing, of course, whether it be nuclear or coal. But we do not have, and a lot of advanced reactor companies say that they're going to build, own, operate. But we don't actually have the precedence of them being utilities.
Yeah.
So we have a lot to go through and discuss when it comes to governance, what it means, what are the pros and cons. And then, of course, we also have to talk about social acceptance. And not just in terms of nuclear, but also in terms of data centers. So you're finding in Loudoun County, for example, it's like, okay, enough is enough. And so, there is a lot to walk through in terms of our energy needs going forward. Of course, there has to be an energy mix. And how do we keep the base load going? And to be honest, I think one of the hardest things for county officials and, of course, for national figures in government is how do we keep the lights on? And how do we make sure our small businesses are thriving? How do we make sure our big industry is thriving? And how do we make sure that homeowners get the energy that they need as well?
Yeah. Do either of you want to jump off, catch that a sort of football from that? I can ask another question.
Julien, you go first.
No, please.
I mean, this idea of how we keep the lights on with a grid that is dominated by intermittent renewables, I think, is a particularly interesting sort of issue for nuclear. I mean, traditionally, large nuclear is a baseload capacity, and you turn your reactor on and you keep it going at temperature as well as you possibly can. It's much better for the reactor systems to operate in that sort of way. Now, if you've got intermittency in your system and all the stability issues that also gives you, how does nuclear, which is really that base part of it, contribute to that? And so there's an awful lot of work being done at the moment in the idea of that you use your nuclear electricity when you need the electricity to the grid, but you then use the electricity produced by nuclear, or you use the heat to do other things. So this is this idea of cogeneration and the way that you can perhaps produce hydrogen, you can use synthetic fuels, you can produce ammonia. And the hydrogen's obvious, you're using electricity to do electrolysis. That's fairly straightforward. But there is so much more you can do with the intense heats. And so how you balance the use of that nuclear. Now, of course, again, going back to the economics, because you always go back to the economics, there is necessarily going to be a hit when you're using or designing a reactor that's got to do more than just that one specific thing. So again, fitting into a systems-like approach, there has to be some form of understanding and economic agreement as to how you can use these reactors in this new way. I think that fits in.
Yeah, I think I should flag some work that's being done by a colleague, Professor Anna Bruce, in the School of PV and Renewable Energy, and it's 24/7 renewables. And one of the drivers has been the Microsofts and the Googles of the world, and their work to basically say we want clean energy supply, but we need it to be firm and 24/7. And they're a fascinating client for renewables project developers and project firms. Of course, they're very cashed up and they're using a growing amount of energy, but their margins are excellent, very different from many of our large industrial loads coming on. But what I think we've seen, and Cindy might want to jump in on this, is certainly internationally and in the US, these tech players seeing very large demand growth are really wanting clean energy. Renewables firmed, one of the options, but there's some challenges there. And so we see them looking at a range of technology options to actually provide that clean computing power that they're all building.
Yeah. Cindy, so going back to sort of your expertise on the nuclear fuel cycle, and the question I posed at the beginning is, if Australia is going to have a nuclear energy program, we're going to need a fuel supply, aren't we? Can you tell?
You do have a lot of uranium.
But it's not it's not that simple, though, is it? I mean, simply, we got a lot of uranium, I know, but you've got to do a lot to it. So can you tell us, I mean, I think your, recounts of what's been happening in Europe since the Ukraine war to the nuclear supply chain is amazing. And what does that mean for a little country like Australia trying to secure fuel for future reactors?
What's happening in the nuclear fuel cycle globally is unprecedented. We are, and there's many drivers. There's incredibly aggressive decarbonization targets by big tech as well as countries. There is conflict that's having an impact, and I'll take you through that in a little bit, as well as, of course, innovation that we're talking about in terms of technologies that are also driving different deployment scenarios and for example, powering industry in remote communities, whether it be in northern Canada or potentially here. And so these are the different aspects that are really starting to move nuclear being considered, and particularly among a larger number of newbie, potentially newbie countries. And including in the Indo-Pacific, you have Philippines, Singapore, Indonesia, Thailand, for example, that are starting to look at this. With Ukraine and with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, of course, we come across some also unfortunate, unprecedented times where we have a nuclear power plant that's actually being annexed. And so for nuclear safety security issues, we have a very robust nuclear program. Ukraine has a very large civilian nuclear program. That is actually undergoing conflict and their facilities are being attacked. So this is a whole other ball game. I hate to put it as a ball game, but it's a whole other threat environment that we're dealing with. At the same time, of course, this also means, energy security is a big driver. So you're seeing that countries in Europe that do have received particularly Russian fuel for their Russian reactors, they are in the process and have been in weaning off of Russian uranium. But Russia's hard to shake. 44% of global enrichment, that's what Russia is able to provide. And I want to make sure I get the number right. Is it 33% it provided to the United States? 30% it provided to the EU in 2022, 35% enriched uranium to the United States. And then last year, the United States actually put a prohibition on imports of Russian uranium, which is obviously a big challenge because 35%, but also the United States can't fuel its own fleet domestically. The only country in the world that can fuel its own nuclear fleet is Canada. From mining through actually now, eventually to waste. No other country can do it on its own. So it is a global effort. It is a global fuel cycle. And so Australia's uranium, for example, goes globally. It is tracked, it's monitored, non-proliferation. It's called Australian Obligated Nuclear Material. And so, in looking at that, though, I can also see, maybe specifically for Australia if they're looking at this, but other countries are starting to consider, well, where do we go for our fuel? And so those countries, of course, Russia is having a number of different agreements. The United States is starting to make its own agreements with different countries, with, for example, Singapore and the Philippines. Meanwhile, Russia is having agreements with Turkey and building power plants there. And also, I should say, Russia is one of the best in the world for selling its reactors.
Yes, that's absolutely, yeah.
And so, again, really, really hard to shake. Not only that, Russia provides everything for it. So that, you can come in and basically they just lease you a reactor. You don't have to worry about it. They even take the fuel back. Beautiful. Easy. Except they might come in and also occupy your reactors. So there's a lot of strategic considerations there to make. So there are a lot of, I can imagine if you are a small country coming in, it is a very confusing fuel cycle, and then particularly if you're looking at advanced reactors and small modular reactors, there's a whole other new supply chain there because we're talking about some funky fuels. We're no longer just talking about spent fuel rods or enriched uranium. We're talking about high assay, low enriched uranium. We're talking about things like molten salt reactors and in high temperature gas reactors. But right now, 97% of the global fleet is water moderated reactors. It's a very small, specific, niched supply chain. So as we start to expand it or move it, then we're going to see, of course, some more shifts and disruptions and some challenges along the way that I don't even think we can fully forecast.
Yeah. Robin, is this putting you on the spot? Do you think we're going to have to do more of the front end of the fuel cycle in Australia to have a secure fuel supply?
I've always been somewhat surprised that given the amount of uranium, uranium basically, Kazakhstan, Canada, and Australia are the big producers of uranium. But Australia's literally dug it out of the ground and sold it on. And there is so much more that Australia could do and get more value out of that if Australia decided to do that. Actually, fascinatingly, in terms of the cost of the nuclear electricity, actually the cost of the fuel is a relatively small part. We're used to thinking about gas reactors, right, where most of the electricity price is from the cost of the gas that you're burning. With nuclear reactors, that's not the case. Actually, most of the cost has been, and of course there are different models, but has been actually the cost of building the reactor in the first place. The cost of the fuel is much lower, and that's because a nuclear reaction generating the heat that drives the turbine is 200 million times more energy than it is in a single chemical reaction. So the fuel and what we've been talking about is utterly crucial, but in terms of the economics, there are options if you're willing to put the money in to actually take more of that front end of the fuel cycle. I'm not sure how much uranium Russia actually produces out of its own mines. It's not...
It's very, very small,
yeah, it's
and
very
it doesn't
small,
export
isn't
any.
It made a strategic decision, didn't it?
Well, actually, no. I mean, what ended up happening was, so Russia, at the end of with the dissolution of the Soviet Union, 90% of the reactors were in Russia proper. 70% of uranium production was in the satellite states.
That's right.
So that's why they also see a lot of joint ventures with Kazakhstan and
Yeah.
Uzbekistan never actually made any, but they're looking at it now.
Yeah.
So actually, no, that's why Russia has a policy of not exporting any of its domestically mined uranium.
And we've had quite a lot of uranium, and actually we haven't gone out there and looked for new uranium resources really seriously for quite a long time. There is undoubtedly a lot more uranium out there to actually find. You wanted to...
Iain wanted to add something.
Oh, look, I think just along those lines, I mean, we need to be careful with reserve estimates because how hard are you looking?
Yeah.
But, you know, some estimates out there is Australia might have a third of the global reserves, 10% of current production. So there's clearly space there. But I wanted to pick up on Cindy's point about the market, the global market for buying reactors right now. And I think since 2017, there's 52 reactor starts, construction starts, 25 are Chinese designs and 23 are Russian designs. So in the global market sense, extremely dominated by those two countries. And when we think about small modular reactors, there's definitional issues here, and I'm sure, Robin, you're going to pick up more on this. Of the 4 operating ones at present, as reported by the International Atomic Energy Agency, 2 are in Russia and 2 are in China. And under construction's Argentina, China, Russia and the US, a high heat reactor there.
This is a great kind of pivot to, you know, the question I wanted to ask Robin is, Robin, what's happening in the UK with SMRs?
Okay, so at the moment we have 2 reactors that are being built at the moment in Hinkley, and we will almost certainly have 2 other very large reactors being built at Sizewell B. And those 4 reactors will produce something like, I'm going to get it right, 12% of our electricity needs. Is it 12% or 11%? But you get the idea. Now, that's current needs. But of course, as we were talking earlier on, the decarbonisation of transport, the decarbonisation of heat means we're going to need something like 4 times the amount of electricity that we have used up to now, where, you know, heat and transport is produced by burning hydrocarbons. So that's going to change. So what we've then been thinking about is small modular reactors. So why go for small modular reactors? Well, small modular reactors are like mini. They're not that mini, they're 300 megawatts. I mean, they're not that small. Yeah. But nevertheless, they are smaller reactors which are more flexible, that you can do more of these other cogeneration things with more straightforwardly. But from a UK perspective, it also gets us back into, I think, the nuclear engineering supply chain. The UK was a very early provider of nuclear reactors with the Magnox fleet, which, by the way, wasn't light water, it was a gas reactor. But we put that aside for the dash for gas before we understood the climate impact. Well, before it was realised, and there were people who did understand that, but nevertheless. What we will then be able to do, we hope, is go on to these advanced modular reactors, which are the high temperatures. And then, again, you're thinking about providing that high temperature heat that you can do interesting chemistry with. So that's the idea. That's what we'd like to be able to do. Is there the political will to do that? We will see. Certainly the larger reactors we've started, but will we actually start building the SMRs and then the AMRs? Well, we'll have to see. By the way, we have a phrase for the SMR designs, the many different SMR designs. They're called paper reactors because, of course, they're just paper.
Yeah, but some are close, right? I mean, we keep on asking, how are the SMRs doing? You know, there's a lot of opposition against the SMR idea, I think, simply because so few have been actually deployed.
So when you're going to build a reactor, you know there are numbers of things, right? You've got to get the reactor design through the regulator. The regulator has to be able to understand that and put that stamp that you are going to be able to produce it. That's partly to the question of how innovative do you want to be on your reactor design versus the advantages that innovation may or may not provide for you. So in the UK, Rolls-Royce has, I think, a very interesting SMR design. I am not paid by Rolls-Royce, I hasten to add at this point, but you know, they have been building reactors in submarines for a very long time, and it's not. It's a straightforward design. So their argument is straightforward reactor that we know will do the job. There are many other designs which are much more innovative, frankly, but they have a much harder job in actually getting it through into the regulator. The supply chain isn't as mature for those sorts of technologies, so there's a balance. And it's really quite hard to know which one is going to be successful. Do you think?
Yeah, look, I think the IAEA says, 32 under detailed design. We actually say basic to details of design and then concepts behind that. I think we've seen this with other technologies as well, and Julien spoke about PV. There was a time when PV hadn't really taken off and there were a lot of competing technologies, you know, is it thin film, is it this or that? And it can take a while for one or two technologies to really emerge as the more successful one. So in a way, the diversity is a real strength for the area. In another way, it makes it a bit harder on the investment piece, doesn't it? Because it's, okay, which one do I sink my money into? So yeah, it's a really promising but challenging space.
What do you think, Cindy?
Yeah, I've got a sort of on the technology theme. Cindy, I've got a Canadian question for you. Do you think can-do reactors are a worthy option for Australia?
I love can-do reactors. And yeah, yes, because natural uranium, you don't have to bother with enrichment. And I think that's one of the reasons also for Canada's success. Well, one, it also has a lot of uranium. And so that's one of the reasons why it went that route. And I think that's also a really important part for countries that are looking at, if you're looking at diversifying your energy grid and you're also looking at energy security, then you have to look at the supply chain for it. Now, shrinking can-do reactors is maybe not as easy, but again, like anything with technology, right? You put a lot of money into it, we will get there. And I mean, the same thing with blockchain. All I hear is like, it's just tech. We can do it. So no, I think they're a good option. I think also, though, of course, depending on what you are looking for, there is a lot of option out there, but then it's a matter of engaging the regulator, engaging industry, engaging all the different stakeholders, engaging your local communities about what it is that makes sense for that community. It's not for someone outside to come in and say it. It's for it is for to be done organically within within communities and countries.
Yeah, I mean, on the community topic, another Cindy question. Is of course nuclear waste.
Oh yeah.
Right. So, what's changed in nuclear waste management?
A lot.
Yeah, because we're at risk, aren't we, of kind of repeating the past? What's changed? Just tell us what's changed in nuclear waste management.
Well, one, we have the world's first deep geological repository for spent nuclear fuel. Almost, if it hasn't already received its first canisters in Finland. And it's not something that's done quickly. I mean, this is a 4, almost 5-decade process of studying, doing the engineering, the local outreach. I mean, all of it comes together in the process. Sweden has received the go-ahead to do its construction, so it'll be the second one to be built. France is high-level waste, not spent nuclear fuel, so a little bit different. But France also is moving forward with its. Switzerland, I think we're waiting for the referendum to be done on that. Canada just picked its site in December. So Canada actually, I think, is an interesting case because, and of course, speaking about Canadians or the Canadian project, where actually in the 90s, the Canadian government realized that they had kind of messed up. And they said that to Canadians. We messed up. We need to reevaluate what we've been doing. And then they created a new act. And established the Nuclear Waste Management Organization. And there are NWMOs, all over in Japan, for example, obviously Canada, in a variety of different countries, so that they can provide this independent, industry-funded nonprofit organization that is responsible for maintaining the waste. So that is something that's actually relatively new over time. But what I think is interesting too about the Canadian example, particularly since in the United States things are not going well on nuclear waste, but where Canada did a consent-based siting approach, right? Where basically asking communities to volunteer, and just because they volunteer doesn't mean that they're now going to be on the hook for becoming a site for a deep geological repository, but more about learning and doing the step-by-step process and getting information along the way. And so communities can come in and go, not for us, but thanks for letting us know more about it. And then those that go through each stage, and then out to the point where they've actually picked the site. And then now Canada's NWMO moves from one of site selection to implementation. So we are learning as we're going on the back end of the fuel cycle, and there is also, of course, a lot of technology that has been studied and built over time. So there is actually some really good news there.
Great, yeah.
Yeah, I think this way that you get the communities to back it is now the standard. I can't remember where that was done first. Was it Canada that was done first? I can't remember.
Well, no, Finland. I mean, Finland.
It was Finland.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that is now the standard way that
France as well has a lot of community buy-in.
I mean, the total amount of high-level nuclear waste of 50 years of electricity generation in the UK would all fit within one St Paul's Cathedral. I think the St Paul's Cathedral is the standard unit of nuclear repositories.
In Canada, it's hockey rinks.
It's hockey rinks.
Yeah.
Hockey rinks, yes, absolutely. Yes, it's one hockey puck is all your high-level nuclear waste for all the electricity that you would need in your entire lifetime.
Right.
I think it was
something like that.
But of course, we've also got intermediate-level nuclear waste, which is something like 10 or 15 times the volume, but it's much, much, much lower. And then we've got the lowest level waste, which is larger again, which we already are able to get rid of. So in terms of actual volumes, we've been getting rid of the lower level stuff for decades and decades and decades. And it's been managed quite successfully in all different countries. Can I ask you a question, actually? If every country ends up with its own repository, then it's like vast numbers of different repositories. Is there a possibility that we can actually do deals between countries so that we can...
I doubt it.
You don't think it's possible?
No.
No?
Well, it's... Look, sporadically over decades, really, Australia has had discussions about being a potential site. We've got a lot of land, including land which might be measured as sort of lower value, competing for farmland in Central Australia and so on, are geologically very stable. But it's been very controversial, and I think part of that, it's always been, well, it's going to be other people's waste. What Australia might do and how the public might perceive a repository if we had our own civilian nuclear power and it was our waste might be quite a different discussion. Don't know.
And I think also, I mean, in 2025 or 2030 or 2040 or whenever a country becomes a civilian nuclear power, the only way you can be a responsible nuclear power is to make sure that you go from beginning to the end.
Yeah, absolutely.
Otherwise, it doesn't make sense.
No, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, Iain, I think I often look at your research now, increasingly even research into renewables is becoming concerned with social license, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
It
Yep.
seems to be the problem everywhere is convincing people to change, doesn't it?
And there's the renewable social license piece, and then there's the transmission lines to renewable social license piece. So, yeah, it's...
Yeah, there was a question here actually, and I wanted to ask you, which is, oh no.
Oh, he's lost it.
Sorry, no, I can remember it actually. It was, how do we, because this is an electrical distribution question, how do we, I think it's an audience question, how do we convince people that distribution costs and LCOE costs are different? And to realize the impact of distribution costs. It's obviously from a nuclear person, right? I mean, maybe, do you want to expand on that a bit and tell us why distribution is expensive and what is the difference? And how does the distribution cost of electricity add on to its wholesale cost?
Yeah, so for a typical household bill here in Australia, it varies year on year depending on how much wholesale energy is costing. But it might be 40 to 45% of the bill is network costs. And the network costs we divide over distribution, network costs and transmission costs. And about 80% of the network cost is actually distribution networks. So if you think about large-scale renewables versus nuclear pathways forward, there could be a significant difference in transmission costs, but much less likelihood of a very significant difference in distribution network costs. There's some issues around consumer energy resources, rooftop PV and so on. But for households, that's the bill. If you're a large energy consumer, the network bills are much lower component. But yeah, networks do cost money. Part of our challenge with costs, of course, is here in Australia, if you've been following it at all, there's been a huge argument over what's called gen cost, which is work done by the CSIRO. They actually do it for the Australian Energy Market Operator for the AEMO's Integrated System Plan, which runs every 2 years. And for a range of reasons, they use levelised cost of energy for different technologies as part of this assessment. The problem is, of course, a levelised cost of energy, which is dollars per megawatt hour, requires the most enormous a number of assumptions around capital costs, maybe future capital costs, but also operating costs, finance. Yeah, there's a whole range of costs in there. And then you're levelising over some expectation of how long this plant runs and how hard it runs, which picked up on your point before, Robin, about more flexible nuclear operation. That's going to be very useful in integration, but it does mean there's less megawatt hours to divide that cost over. So lots of focus on gen cost, and we say, well, they say, well, firm renewables, entirely clear what that means. They do define it. Maybe $80 to $130 per megawatt hour. Large-scale nuclear, 150 to 250. Small modular reactors, significantly more expensive. So that's this gen cost study. But CSIRO's very explicit about it. These are numbers which come out of making a very large number of assumptions. And we have no hard numbers about the future, right? Don't have facts about the future till you get there. So there's a lot of judgment modelling forward. The issue is those LCO numbers don't actually tell you directly what the least cost mix is going forward. And just to give you one example, the LCOE, levelised cost of energy for gas generation, is really high. And it picks up on a point Robin made before about gas generation. The fuel's very expensive, and these plants don't run very often. So if you just look at LCOE, you'd go, why are we talking about gas? Okay? But it can be useful in the mix if you need generation which doesn't run often. Okay? What we're now seeing, of course, is gas is being outcompeted in a growing number of markets by renewables and storage. So we're seeing progress in battery energy storage, and that's very challenging to put into levelised cost. So what you really need are, and there's still a lot of assumptions, you really need system-level capacity expansion modelling. very complex activity. It's what AEMO does every 2 years. Ed mentioned the frontier modelling, which was recently done on the Coalition's plan. They kind of reverse engineered the integrated system plan, took one of the scenarios and added nuclear, and then modelled forward. But that's the sort of analysis that you really need to work out least cost mixes in the future. Now, AEMO's view is with current projected costs, Australia and its pathway to reducing emissions and eventually down to net zero is very, very renewables and storage focused. In other countries doing these studies, they come up, they have different renewable endowments, they have different demand profiles and challenges. So there's a global story for nuclear, and then there's a jurisdictional story. Now, there's 40 countries out there which are looking to expand nuclear. So there's new countries in that mix, right? Because there's, 32, 34 countries that currently have nuclear power. But just want to flag the complexities around these cost discussions. I just want to give a shout out to a colleague, Dr. Dylan McConnell, who's leading a project at this university called OpenISP. And what we're trying to do is create an open source set of tools that allow a wide range of stakeholders, which could be nuclear advocates, carbon capture, to run different scenarios for Australia's least cost future. So if you want to know more about that project, OpenISP and Dr. Dylan McConnell.
So we're going to put nuclear in OpenISP, yeah?
People want to add nuclear, it's open source.
Brilliant.
You can download the code, you can put your own data in. You want to add nuclear?
There we go.
Right ahead.
Nuclear students, let's add nuclear in the OpenISP. Yeah. Be brilliant.
I have nuclear in my least cost assignments, my power system courses. It doesn't do so well, but there's a lot of assumptions. Sorry.
Look, we haven't got so much time left now. Let's talk a little bit about education, okay, as the future nuclear engineer. Cindy, I'm interested because you've really worked in this space between engineering, technology, policy, strategy as a think tank person. What do you think the absolutely essential knowledge or skills are for the future nuclear engineer?
Oh, they need to understand policy.
Okay.
Why do we have the governance that we have? One of the things that I get frustrated with in anything to do with dual use, whether it be chem, bio, and nuclear, is an engineer or a scientist who's like, I want to put a chicken's head on a cow's body because that would be cool. And I just get horrified. No, that is not cool. And so, but it's and then they go, well, why? Well, because there's a thing called the Biological Weapons Convention. And same thing on the chemical side. We have a Chemical Weapons Convention. We have the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. And so understanding that, uranium is the world's most regulated rock for a reason. And so I think it's important to instill that so that you understand the code of conduct in terms of the science that you're doing and the engineering, and to make sure that everything is done for good. And that, of course, it also has to be fully verifiable when we're talking about new advanced reactors. So when engineers get in there and really geek out, which is great, then it's also, okay, but wait, can we get other third-party people to come in and actually inspect what it is that we are building? Because if not, it's never going to go anywhere. So these are the kinds of things I think it's always important to understand the historical context of where we are today and why we have the rules and regulations that we do have.
Yeah, thanks. Iain, what do you think? What's the essential
knowledge
for the future?
You and your colleagues in the Nuclear Innovation Centre have given way more thought to this than I have. But I might just make a quick comment around experience teaching students in my electricity industry operation and control and planning and economics courses. Lots of them are electrical engineering, lots of them are PV and renewable energy, but they come from other engineering schools as well. Some are coming from your nuclear program as well. What is motivating them is to be part of something that's important, interesting and challenging, and delivers, as Julien said, real social impact. They want a good career, but they want that impact. And the clean energy transition right across UNSW, we've got the Nuclear Innovation Centre, we've got the School of PV and Renewable Energy, we've got Mineral Energy Resource Engineering, Chemical Engineering. There are students right across all those engineering schools who really want to work on clean energy, and our ability to channel that and show them the breadth of opportunity that there is, to me, is how you not only just get lots of students, but you get really good and motivated students. That's what we're really looking for.
Yeah.
Some of them are sitting out here today.
I think they are, yeah. Robin, you must have a good answer to the future nuclear engineer.
So what we're trying to do with the teaching here at UNSW is ensure that our students, who are very clever, they're really good. They ask all sorts of difficult questions, which are, like 7:30 at night, you really don't want to have to deal with, but they do that, right? We want them, if we were sat here 25 years ago, right, we would be thinking about gas and all these innovative students who are going to go in and produce gas-fired power stations and things like that. We're sitting here today knowing that we absolutely don't want them to be doing those sorts of things. We want to give them options. So at UNSW, we want them to be thinking people. We want them to be flexible. We want them to be able to understand the issues, why we don't put a chicken's head on a cow, right? Why we need them to understand, why we need to understand how the capacity that they're looking at fits into the entire grid stability. We need them to understand the economics. And so we're trying to get them to be much more rounded engineers, I think, now. And this program is going to deliver those sorts of people.
Yeah, I think what's always excited me about nuclear engineering is it forces you to connect with the social impact and the policy implications of what you're doing. And I always find that rewarding and exciting, being a nuclear engineer.
That's a good stop.
Yeah. Shall we finish there?
25 seconds.
Yeah.
25 seconds to go. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.